I think we're all set. Thumbs up if we can hear. Good. Okay, fabulous. So thrilled to be part of this webinar. When I was first looking through what this was going to be about and who was going to be included, number one, incredibly inspired, but number two, came to the realization that I wish that we talked about this stuff more. Like I wish it wasn't just May. I wish that we were all able to champion things like this, especially as women. So starting off here, Champion Our Progress, sponsored by you by Kotex. They've recently launched their partnership with all of you here, NFWL, to make sure that a period or any negative perception of a period never get in the way of any woman's progress. No student should have to miss school, no adult miss work because they are unable to afford the menstrual hygiene supplies that they need. So there's been some incredible research that's actually just been released this week by you by Kotex in recognition of Period Poverty Awareness Week, shows that 2 in 5 people have struggled to purchase period products. I mean, that's incredible. It's a 35% increase from the brand's initial research back in 2018. So to see where we are, we're going backwards rather than going forwards in this problem. Over 1/3, so 38% of low-income women report missing work, school, or similar events due to lack of access to period supplies. Nearly 7 in 10, 68% of people agree that period poverty is a public health issue, yet only 4% of Americans are aware of a local resource where free or reduced cost period supplies are available. That should not be the case. And there's things that we can do and that we're going to learn what we can do during this webinar. This research shines a bright light on the reason that has brought us all together, what we can do as leaders to address period poverty and ensure that young menstruators don't feel that they're left behind due to the lack of access to menstrual hygiene products. We have an incredible group of leaders who are going to discuss the health and the wellness implications due to lack of access to period products and outline what we can all do. So it's great to hear these statistics, but we need some action items. Like, what are things that we can take away from this webinar? So we have 3 people that you're going to be hearing from today. We're starting off with our first panelist, Dr. Stacey Tanawi. She is a published author, an experienced speaker who's been featured on podcasts and news articles as a women's health expert. She is a board certified gynecologist physician, member of the American Congress of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, and the International Society for the Study of Women's Sexual Health, and a women's blogger. After her, we're going to be hearing from Washington State Representative April Berg. She recently was able to pass House Bill 1273 through the Washington legislature, which was recently signed by the governor there. Representative Berg's bill provides period products in school bathrooms, just like toilet paper, which we hope can be everywhere. Representative Berg is newly elected in Washington State. She is the first Black woman to represent her district. And then we're going to hear from a student advocate who's really going to show us how kids and how teenagers, how people who are really affected by this problem can also step up and do something. Her name is Aiden Jane, and you're going to be really inspired by her story. She's from Washington State University, chapter president of Period. So Period is a global nonprofit organization. It's fighting to end period poverty and stigma through service and through education and through advocacy. Aiden, she worked with student advocates in partnership and support of Representative Berg's bill that the governor recently signed. So those two have been actually working together. And before we send it over to Dr. Stacey Tanawi, I want to make sure that if you guys have questions, whether it's for our doctor who's going first or for Representative Berg or Aiden, post them in the chat and who that question is for, and we'll be sure to answer some of those questions at the very end. So if you have any questions during it, post it in the chat. Without further ado, so excited to be part of this. Dr. Stacey Tanawi, why don't you take us off and get started here?
Thank you, everyone. And the Emmys in the background, I mean, Emma, those are amazing. But I have some slides that I'm going to share with everyone. So I am going to get that started here. And we will get started. So Period Poverty Awareness Week. I am Dr. Stacey Tanawi. Like Emma said, board certified OBGYN physician. I'm also a U by Kotex spokesperson. I'm on social media as Dr. Stacey T. So some people have maybe seen me there. And I want to discuss how period stigma affects period poverty and therefore the health consequences that come from that. So let's start, as we kind of talked about already. Period poverty is the lack of access to period products, but not only products, but also period education and the facilities needed to use those. So bathroom facilities, hand washing facilities, and basic necessities like that. And this new study survey by Kotex that came out shows that 2 in 5 menstruators are affected. So let's back up a little bit with a little history about period stigma. So we all know that menstruation has been stigmatized since the beginning of time. Historically, periods have been seen as dirty. People have been considered weak and even hysterical at times. In fact, the term hysteria comes from the Greek word hystra, meaning uterus, because way back in the day, people actually believed that the uterus was the sole source of things like excessive emotions and sexuality and all mental illness. And so this is where the problems begin. In some cultures, even today, periods are stigmatized so heavily that people who menstruate are actually physically segregated from society and forced to remain in literal menstrual huts or tents or separate living quarters outside of their home for the duration of their periods. The thought being that menstruators are impure, they're dirty, and they shouldn't be allowed to contribute to society in any meaningful way. And although this concept might sound crazy to us, it does happen throughout the world even today. But here in the US, it's not that crazy of a concept, because although we don't have a physical hut that we are isolating people to, menstruators and period poverty is actually effectively doing this to menstruators. So period poverty is serving to isolate period who menstruate, and it affects people both by income, and it's disproportionately affects people by race, and this is amplified by all of this historical period stigma that we know today. And so who does this affect? As we kind of talked about, in the past, the historical figure that lots of people have always referenced is 1 in 4 menstruators, 25%. But we know that in this past year, by this new survey done by Kotex, that this number is increasing, probably because of in relationship to the pandemic and its effects. So up to 40% of menstruators are affected by period poverty. And we also know that this disproportionately affects Black and Latina menstruators. When we look at the consequences of that, we find that 1 in 3 low-income women miss school or work because they don't have access to these products. And if they're missing school or work, that means less income, less opportunity, even less access to period products. And sometimes people are even having to choose between purchasing period products or providing food and shelter for their families. And what do you think we are going to choose? And so it just becomes this vicious cycle over and over again that becomes harder and harder to get out of. And so if you can't buy period products, what do menstruators do? And this is where the health implications come into play. In that same survey that was done, that was just released last week, 40% of Black menstruators use alternative products or have used alternative products. And this includes things like paper towels, toilet paper, baby infant diapers, socks, rags, anything that people can find. And 36% of Black menstruators reported that they actually stretched the use of their period products beyond the recommended use. And we all know that that has health consequences. That can cause things like increasing vulvar irritation, chafing, itching, actually increase infection risks such as urinary tract infections or things like bacterial vaginosis. And we all know the warning labels on tampon boxes. If you wear your tampon for longer than recommended, you are actually increasing your risk of toxic shock syndrome, which can be incredibly dangerous. Not only does it have physical implications, but we also know from data and research that period poverty actually also increases things like embarrassment, shame, and true clinical depression as well. So as just a brief overview, period poverty just reinforces the stigma that periods are dirty, embarrassing, and that menstruators shouldn't participate in society. Because without access to essential menstrual product, we know that the physical and mental health is negatively impacted in such a way that menstruators actually begin to believe this stigma, to believe that they are dirty and unworthy because they are forced to self-isolate every single month for this normal physiologic occurrence that half of the world's population will have at some point in their lives. Therefore, period poverty is basically our society's menstrual hut. We have to do something about this. People who have periods, they deserve better. And so I just want to thank my fellow panelists who are here, Representative Berg and Aiden Jane, for their tireless advocacy and all that they have done. Thanks to you by Kotex and the National Foundation of Women Legislators for hosting this, discussing and committing to ending period poverty. And I hope that gave a little bit of background of why medically and health-wise, this is such an important issue.
Fabulous. Dr. Stacy Tanaway. Okay, wait, I butchered your last name the entire time, so that must have been
Everyone
painful.
does.
Well, giving you a little context here, my real last name is Brazier, but people started calling me Emma Brazier. So then I realized I should change my last name. Yours, thankfully, is nothing like that. I just totally butchered it. But thank you so much. I wanted to ask you a question though. With, being a doctor in gynecology, what do you hear from patients who maybe are in the situation where they aren't able to afford period supplies? What does it do to them mentally that you've seen?
I think it's incredibly embarrassing because of the period stigma, people don't want to talk about it, so they don't want to ask for period products. So even if you're exposed to public situations where it might be available to you, schools or school nurses or health departments, or even coming to the physician, people don't want to ask because periods themselves are embarrassing, and it's embarrassing to admit that you can't source those products for yourself. So it's incredibly shaming, it's incredibly embarrassing, and then that just tumbles all the way into things like clinical depression and anxiety. It really does negatively impact both physical and mental and emotional health significantly.
In your opinion, what can we do, like even just in our day-to-day lives, to kind of take away and just shed the embarrassment of it? Like it's so funny. Like
yeah.
I'm like on my period right now, and it's just like, why do I feel silly saying that out loud? Like every woman goes through this.
Yeah, because someone's going to tell you, oh, you must be on the rag, or oh, this is because you're acting like this because you must be on your period. Because we stigmatize it so much as such a negative thing. What we can do is basically what we're doing here. We're talking about it. We're using terms. We're talking about menstruation. We're talking about periods. We're not using slang terms to discuss any of these things, and we're openly putting it all out there. And I think the more that we can talk about it, the more we can normalize this subject, the more it is going to become a normal part of our daily conversation because it's a normal part of our life. I mean, in terms of period poverty, we don't ask people to carry around a roll of toilet paper because you have to pee, right? When people urinate, you can find a bathroom in your workplace, in your school, and and those bathrooms are expected to provide us with toilet paper most of the time. But menstruation is the same thing. Half of the world's population at some point in their reproductive lives are going to have periods, and that's just the normal fact. And we are forced to, go out of our way to have access to these products and purchase these products, which are taxed in many places. And it's just not, it's not an easy thing for a normal part of life. We don't want to talk about it.
So taking everything that we learned from you and now putting it into action, that's exactly what Representative Berg did. Representative Berg, we're going to send things over to you now. We would love to hear what inspired you to create the bill that you created. If you got any pushback, the process, take it away for us, Representative Berg.
Thank you so much, Emma. And thank you, Dr. Stacy, because that was very, very informative. And honestly, that's why I sponsored this bill. So I'm a mom, number one, and the idea for this bill really came from my kiddos, my girls. But when I'm a first-term legislator, when I got into the legislature, it was already a thought there. This was already something that our Senate had unanimously passed the previous session, and it hadn't made it over to the House floor. So there was that piece of it. The reason why the Senate had even gotten that far was because of amazing student advocates like the one you're going to hear later, Aiden. And I'm so happy that she's able to join us on the call because, quite frankly, the students in our state laid the foundation for this amazing legislation. But one of the pieces of legislation we did get across the field the previous, or across the finish line, the previous session, was to eliminate the pink tax. So I always think about ending period poverty and menstrual equity as kind of an iterative function. And so we had to start with something really big, which was ending that pink tax, and then moving into making products free and available at all of our educational institutions. So one of the things that my bill is different than previous ones was that this is for every institution, pretty much third grade through college, including our community and technical colleges. That was really important. Period poverty does not stop when a child graduates high school. The other piece of it is this bill really addresses menstruating individuals. And I think that's something that we as women legislators need to really talk more about, is that this is about menstruating individuals. And so it's not confined to simply those of us that identify as women. And so that was really important to get the gender inclusive language in 1273, the number of my bill. The next piece of it was making sure that these products were available in gender neutral bathrooms, and addressing the fact that not all places have gender neutral bathrooms. So the bill also requires that if you don't have a gender neutral bathroom, you have to have this available in a men's facility. So that was another big step towards progress. It, quite frankly, during a public health crisis, to talk about public health in this way felt like a moonshot. And this is the year of moonshots. And I told my colleagues, I told our wonderful advocates that, this is the year where the impossible became necessary. And I think that was one of the reasons that this bill was able to really make it through all of the steps in both the House and the Senate, get signed by the governor, and be just that second step towards ending period poverty in our state. Because the next we need to start talking about some of our public facilities beyond educational institutions. So it was powerful, it was amazing, but it was a team effort.
Okay, Representative Berg, what were we're even getting some people in the chat who are having to deal with a little bit of pushback when they, put together bills that deal with this stuff. Did you receive any pushback? What were you receiving? How was the feeling when you brought something like this up?
So the first pushback, and I will say, kudos to my male colleagues. There was not pushback from the male colleagues, either in the House or the Senate. I think because we had passed the pink tax previously and gotten, halfway across the finish line in other years with a similar bill, that the conversation was already there and the ground was laid. But of course, the pushback always is about that unfunded mandate, that it costs money. And I think Dr. Stacy laid it out really well. This is toilet paper. At no point are we ever expected to walk into a bathroom and not have toilet paper. So at no point should any person be expected to walk into a bathroom and not have what they need functionally for that moment. And so that was how we really, we pushed back against the pushback. The other powerful piece, and again, back to the students, and I know Aiden will cover this, were the stories, right? Those real life stories. So even if you had male or female colleagues kind of going, is this the right time? Is this the right moment? You listen to some of the students that testified on this bill, and you had no doubt that this was the moment, this was the time, and it was absolutely necessary. So I think that was kind of a three-pronged approach to get this done, but get it done in a very, very collaborative way. This was a bipartisan bill, bipartisan support, and frankly, folks from both sides of the aisles who identify as women really had passionate stories about why we needed this now.
Representative Berg, when you look at the statistics that we talked about in the beginning and how we're seeing an even bigger problem now versus back in 2018, what can you attribute that to?
Well, I think, COVID highlighted the inequities, right? So it really laid bare that foundationally we have not done as a society what we need to do to help protect and support and keep everyone healthy. And so it's heartbreaking, but it's not shocking. The fact that period poverty during a public health crisis has increased is pretty much on track. And that's why I said we had to be about moonshots this session. I know a lot of my colleagues who are listening today are still in session. So it's not too late, right? So you really have to understand that that folks are at the bare bones, at the absolute edge of, existing in terms of housing, in terms of food security. And so when it comes to period poverty, yes, that might be the last thing, the very last thing on their list of needs that they're filling. So it's shocking, but it's why we need bills like this, so that we do not have to have our students missing out on education because of period poverty.
It sounds like now is such a crucial and critical time to get it going. What if I'm
Absolutely.
a representative? What's the first thing I need to do to get something like this going in my state?
Absolutely. Well, first thing, I think all of us learn from each other in other states. So I like to tell folks, drop it like it's hot. Drop that bill. We've got a template now in Washington State. We've got other states that have had bills that have been successful. Drop your bill. Work with your partners, your advocates, your stakeholders, and your students. I say drop that bill because that gets the conversation going. And so wherever you are in your legislative process, if you still have the ability to drop legislation, do it, so that the conversation, the doors can be open. We all know that these are sometimes multi-year projects, right? So waiting until it's perfect, waiting until you have that perfectly baked apple pie of a bill ready is probably not the right thing to do. Again, we are in a public health crisis. There is no better time to take that moonshot than right now. If you are beyond that deadline, like us in our state, we have closed up for the session, then start getting something ready for pre-filing whenever that window opens in your state. But again, talk to your students. We could not have done that without our students, our young menstruating individuals, telling us exactly what it's like, very graphically, what it's like to be not just in period poverty, but have lack of access to those products when you need them the most. And one story that I'm going to share that's in our public testimony, a young lady testified that a friend was taking a high stakes test. We've all been there, taking a high stakes test, and her period starts, wasn't expecting it. So what would you do? Well, you go to your backpack and maybe get a product, maybe get a quarter so you can go to the bathroom and do that. Well, it's a high stakes test. You'd be cheating. You don't have access to your backpack. So her friend was told that you need to sit there. You can go to the restroom, but she didn't have a quarter or the product that she needed to access it in that moment. And she sat for the next 3 hours taking that test. And I can tell you right now, she was not focusing on that test. And so it was testimony like that that really made folks see, my colleagues see, that we had to do this now. And now with studies like the one that was just released, we know we did the right thing and that there's more to be done.
So for representatives who are listening, for them to find stories like that within their own communities, what's a good stepping stone? Like, where should they go to find people who can really champion this bill alongside them?
So one of the things I did when before I was elected was I actually reached out to the folks at Period, and it was funny because I was so excited they had chapters not at my kids' high schools but really close, adjacent. So one of the things they told me was like, so you can't really start your own chapter because you're not a high school student. I was like, ooh, it's like good point. That's a little creepy. So that said, but it made me understand where were the advocates who were doing the advocacy. So my girls, as soon as I think maybe 2 days after election night, they put out a poll on Instagram to their friends. And I mean, within hours, they had not only yes, no's to should this be free and available in your schools, but stories, from X student at X high school, this happened. And I'm reading these going, I just got elected. And I think I can do something about this. And again, lucky enough, when I put my hand in the air and sort of uphold the Constitution of my state, there are already people there doing this work. But if you don't know the I don't want to say just always students, but really the students are just so powerful. If you don't know where to find them, reach out to the folks nationally at the period clubs. In our state, we have some amazing advocates at the Red Sea Project and other menstrual equity projects around. it won't take you long to find passionate advocates in your community that will have stories readily available. And quite frankly, if you don't have period projects at your schools, your high schools or colleges, reach out to them to see how you can get it started. Kind of like me, right? They might say, hey, you're not the one, but you can maybe encourage some student advocates to get those chapters going.
And speaking of those student advocates, we're going to send it over now to Aiden Jane, who's joining us, who is a student advocate with Period, who you were able to team up with. Aiden, we would love to hear your story. So if you can take it away for us, unmute yourself, and let's hear a little bit about how you got involved here.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Emma. And thank you so much, Representative Averberg and Stacy. Stacy, I loved your slides. That was incredible. In love with that. So I'm Aiden Garland-Miner. I'm the president and founder of the Period chapter at Washington State University. I joined the menstrual movement in about 2019 after I read Nadia Okamoto's book, Period Power. She's the founder of Period. I started by founding a chapter at Washington State University, and then I organized a rally in 2019 for National Period Day. And then in the past few months, I started the Washington State for Menstrual Equity Coalition with my friend Aggie at the Red Sea Collective. So why is menstrual equity important to me? I'm going to share a little piece of my testimony that I've shared a few times when I've testified in the state hearings for the bill that Representative Averberg recently got passed, HB 1273, and a few others that we've had in the past. So when I was 13, I was in 7th grade at a new school. I had my first period when I was 11, so I had been menstruating for a few years, but I definitely wasn't a pro with periods, although I don't think I'm even a pro now. So I was at school one day and I went to the bathroom to check my pad, and it was soaked, and I didn't bring another one. I knew it was the heaviest day of my cycle, but I was not prepared. Our schools didn't have period products in the bathroom. I know that some schools do now, but at the time that was non-existent as far as I know. I had never been anywhere with period products in the bathroom. I heard that school's nurse's office had pads, but I wasn't proud of my period as I am now. I was slide your pad up your sleeve while you walk to the bathroom, ashamed of being a menstruator, so I wasn't comfortable doing that. Instead, I tied my jacket around my waist and hoped for the best. Unfortunately, this was the first and heaviest day of my period, so I bled into my jacket the entire day. I'm confident that I also bled onto the metal seats of each classroom I spent time in, which was like 6 classrooms. I spent the entire day agonizing worry about the blood that I knew was seeping through my jeans, through the jacket, and onto the chairs. I remember sitting there, heart pounding, and all I could think about was how trapped I felt. I even had to stay after school for tutoring, and when my dad picked me up later that day, I didn't tell him about it either, because I did not talk to my dad about my period at that time. Thankfully, that has changed, but for a lot of people, it hasn't. So I didn't get to let go of the stress until I got to my mom's office that evening, and she was shocked to hear that I had been bleeding into my jacket for about 7 hours at that point. And my experience with period poverty is rather limited. A lot of menstruators don't attend school at all due to period poverty, because who wants to sit in class and worry about their peers seeing blood on their pants all day when they don't have access to something that should be free and easily accessible at the minimum. For some, period poverty is a chronic barrier they face when it comes to work and school, and it's something we can eliminate by implementing menstrual equity policy, which is why we're all here, like with the passing of HB 1273 in Washington State, thanks to Representative Averberg. So after National Period Day in 2019, I think for me, that's kind of the event that really sparked action across Washington State. We already had students and teams and legislators talking about it, but that's around the time that after that, the tampon tax was eliminated with that bill. And then that's when we started having, we had, I think, SB 5070 and 6073 came into action, and we started having these more widespread conversations. We started by urging our Washington State legislators to support the bills that we're going through by emailing and calling them. We submitted written testimony. We talked about it with anyone that would listen. Arguably, that's one of the most important parts. We created and shared petitions, and we tried to mobilize as many young people across the state as we could, and we urged them to do the same. When SB 5070 and HB 1273 came along, I started testifying in the public hearings on a pretty regular basis, and submitted my support when I couldn't do that. And the more I attended the hearings, the more I realized there were other students in Washington State doing the same work that I was, yet I didn't know them. And that seemed like a really big missed opportunity. So that's when I reached out to my friend Aggie at the Red Sea Collective, and we decided to start a coalition to bring all of our energy together to make an even bigger impact. Being a part of a coalition of people who are all passionate and driven to make menstrual equity a reality is not only incredibly empowering, but it's powerful, because strength and power in numbers. It's important that we created a coalition because we've established connections and relationships with other advocates and other organizations across the state. And we also show our legislators and our governor and other people in high power positions that we are powerful, we are united, and we are ready. And I think it shows in some ways that we know what we're doing, even though we often feel like we don't. So that's kind of nice as well. If you're not sure where to start, I think my number one piece of advice is to start by having a conversation. So finding someone, a friend, a fellow legislator who is willing to talk to you about periods. I always say that conversations are what we need in order to make menstrual equity a reality. We need to have these conversations with more people, which is why we're all here today, right? Which is super exciting. But we need to make sure that everyone is included in the conversation, particularly those who are the most resistant. And I think we definitely have seen people, men in particular, in legislative spaces who don't want to have these conversations. And arguably, those are the people that we need to talk to the most. The stigma against menstruation has kept us quiet for a really long time, but that can't happen anymore, right? Because we want to make menstrual equity a reality for all. So now that we have HB 1273 passed, and hopefully we'll see menstrual equity implemented in a reality in our schools in Washington State, which is incredible. Our next step is to make sure that there are students at schools all across Washington State that can keep our government accountable and our schools accountable for providing those products. So that's one of our really big steps, and my focus I see in the next few years is making sure that the products are provided when they're supposed to be. And then I know that one of my next steps, I really want to start thinking about implementing policy for menstrual equity in prisons, because that is one area that is left out of the conversation a lot. Typically, in the US don't have access to menstrual products, and there aren't policies in place that say that the institutions have to provide them. So those are basically my next steps as of now. Thank you so much for having me. This has been
All right, Aiden, one of the things that you touched on was actually something that someone brought up in the chat. I'm going to try and pull it up here. I think it was Representative Schofield from Georgia. She said she's having a really hard time with the bill that she's working on because of the men. And you were saying that your tip would be to really start the conversations. Can you kind of expand on that? What in particular can someone like Representative Schofield do to kind of get over it, guys? Like, we need to talk about this because it's a massive public health issue.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally understand that struggle. I think the first thing that comes to mind is that period poverty is an intersectional issue. It affects so many people across intersecting identities, right? And it impacts different people at disproportionate rates. So that's one big, that's a big problem, right? And then it's also, I think a lot of people, I hear something, the saying that we hear is like, period poverty is a women's issue, right? It's not just a women's issue, right? In fact, it's a healthcare issue, right? It's a lack of resource distribution issue. It's an issue in our schools, in our jails, in our workplaces, right? And it keeps people from being able to function in their daily lives, right? And if 50% of the population is menstruating and we provide toilet paper to 100% of the population, we should be providing menstrual products as well. I think the fact that not having menstrual products is such a big impediment to people that don't have access to them in not only being able to function, but feeling comfortable, like physically and mentally comfortable throughout the day should be motivating.
I can't even imagine what you as that young girl bleeding through onto your jacket would be thinking of the work you're doing now. It is so inspiring, Aiden, for people who maybe want to inspire young women like yourself. What can representatives do to kind of get, I mean, this is an issue that we all deal with. So how do we find more people like you within our own communities?
Yeah, absolutely. I think reaching out to students, right? Finding young people is the most important thing. I mean, I'm a little biased, I know, but we're very energized and we're ready to put in the hours. If you don't know how to find those young people, they definitely do exist in all of your states. I know it can be hard to find them though. You can reach out to us at the Period Network and we can connect you to chapters. We also know of other organizations that are not period chapters that are also doing menstrual equity work. And we can connect you to those people.
All right, so as we conclude here, You by Kotex has developed tools and resources to help all of us and to deepen our engagement and support for ending period poverty. We do want to call on Sarah Faye Pierce. She's the Senior Director for Government Relations for You by Kotex, a Kimberly-Clark brand, to share just a little bit more and wrap things up for us. Sarah, we're going to send it over to you.
Thanks, Emma, and good afternoon, everyone. And oh my goodness, panels, thank you so much. I was inspired coming to the table today, and my enthusiasm runneth over. So thank you so much. And I hope everyone listening today will just take what was shared out and take it back to your legislatures and just run with it. And there are so many resources just here on this webinar today. Please reach out to me. We want to help advance these policies in your state governments, and we're so excited to do that. But as part of our activation and support of the foundation, I also wanted to announce that You by Kotex is hosting donation events this year. 5 states this summer and early fall will be holding bipartisan events supported by the foundation, the Alliance for Period Supplies, which is a charitable organization that we stood up that seeks to combat period poverty, and of course our brand. It sounds like we need to bring some men to this conversation, ladies, and so part of this activation, I think, is a perfect way to do that. We're calling on all of the leaders here who are part of the foundation to host your own product donation events in your communities by partnering with an allied partner of the Alliance for Period Supplies. And you can go to the Grab and Go tab on the NFWL website. There's going to be local allied partner information for the Alliance for Period Supplies, information on how to host your own event. We're calling these grassroots donation events, and other resources that can contribute to making your event a huge success, which is ultimately putting an end for now, forever, the issue of period poverty. There is a sign-up page, so we know which leaders are participating in these grassroots events around the country. So just head over to Grab and Go, and we hope you would actually just sign up today. And again, go get those guys and get them to be part of your event. I think we need to bring them to the table. But also, I wanted to let you know that You by Kotex is sweetening the pot. We want to entice as many of you to join and host these events as we possibly can. And so for the remainder of this year, you can hold these events. And as we're examining activations for these events by the brand in 2022, we want to take the collective of what happened from a grassroots perspective with events in your local communities and pick from those which events we'll do next year. And those will be announced in November at NFWL's annual meeting. So with that, I just wanted to thank you all so much for your attention, for your time, for your passion, and really your engagement, and really go out and let's all make a difference together. Thank you so very much. And this will conclude today's program.
All right, thank you guys. Thanks everyone. So inspiring. Let's make a difference because we know that we need it. Thanks again.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you everyone for being on. We really appreciate it. This is exciting for NFWL and we're thrilled to be a part of it. So thank you.
Thanks everyone.